One day, Ishmael began, the gods were considering the administration of the world, and one of them said, "Here's a spot I've been thinking about, a wide, pleasant savanna. Let's send a great multitude of locusts into this land. Then the fire of life will grow prodigiously in them, and in the birds and the lizards that will feed on them, and that will be very fine." The others thought about this for a while, and then one said, "It's certainly true that if we send the locusts into this land, the fire of life will blaze in them and in the creatures that feed on them, but at the expense of all others. Wouldn't it be a great crime to deprive all these other creatures of the fire of life so that the locusts and the birds and the lizards can flourish for a time? For the locusts will strip the land bare, and the deer and the gazelles and the goats and the rabbits will go hungry and die. And with the disappearance of the game, the lions and the wolves and the foxes will soon be dying too. Won't they curse us then and call us criminals for favoring the locusts and the birds and the lizards over them?" Now the gods had to scratch their heads over this because they'd never looked at things this way before. But finally one said, "This is no problem. We just won't do it. We won't raise a multitude of locusts to send into this land, and then things will go on as before, and no one will have any reason to curse us." Most agreed, but one said, "Surely this would be as great a crime as the other. Don't the locusts and the birds and the lizards live in our hands as well as the rest? Is it never to be their time to flourish greatly as others do?" While the gods were debating this, a fox came out to hunt, and they said, "Let's send the fox a quail for its life." But these words were hardly spoken when one said, "Surely it would be a crime to let the fox live at the quail's expense. The quail has its life that we gave it and lives in our hands. It would be infamous to send it into the jaws of the fox." Then another said, "Look here, the quail is stalking a grasshopper. If we don't give the quail to the fox, the quail will eat the grasshopper. Doesn't the grasshopper have its life that we gave it, and doesn't it live in our hands as truly as the quail? Surely it would be a crime not to give the quail to the fox so that the grasshopper may live." Well, as you can imagine, the gods groaned heavily over this and didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, spring came, and the snow waters of the mountains began to swell the streams, and one of them said, "Surely it would be a crime to let these waters flood the land, for countless creatures will drown." But another said, "Surely it will be a crime not to let these waters flood the land, for without them the ponds and marshes will dry up, and everything that lives in them will die." And once more the gods were thrown into confusion. Finally one of them had a new thought. "Clearly, any action we take will be good for some and evil for others. So let's take no action at all. Then no one can call us criminals." "Nonsense," another snapped. "If we take no action at all, this will also be good for some and evil for others, won't it? The creatures that live in our hands will say, 'Look, we suffer and the gods do nothing.'" And while the gods bickered among themselves, the locusts swarmed over the savannah, and the locusts and the birds and the lizards praised the gods, while the game and the predators died cursing the gods. And because the gods had taken no action, the quail lived, and the fox went hungry to its hole, cursing the gods. And because the quail lived, it ate the grasshopper, and the grasshopper died, cursing the gods. And because in the end the gods decided to stem the flood of spring waters, the ponds and the marshes dried up, and all that lived in them died, cursing the gods. And hearing these curses, the gods groaned. "We have made the garden a place of terror, and our creatures hate us. And they're right to do this, because by action or inaction we send them good one day and evil the next without knowing what we should do." Well, the gods were near despair when one looked up and said, "Say, didn't we make for the garden a certain tree whose fruit is the knowledge of good and evil?" "Yes," cried the others, "let's find that tree and eat of it and see what this knowledge is." And when the gods had found this tree and had tasted its fruit, their eyes were opened, and they said, "Now indeed we have the knowledge we need to tend the garden without becoming criminals and without earning the curses of all who live in our hands." And as they were talking, a lion went out to hunt, and the gods said, "Today is the lion's day to go hungry, and the deer may live another day." So the lion missed its kill and began to curse the gods, but they said, "Be at peace, for we know how to rule the world, and today is your day to go hungry." And the lion was at peace. And the next day the lion went out to hunt, and the gods sent it the deer they had spared the day before. And as the deer felt the lion's jaws on its neck, it began to curse the gods. But they said, "Be at peace, for we know how to rule the world, and today is your day to die, just as yesterday was your day to live." And the deer was at peace. Then the gods said to themselves, "Certainly the knowledge of good and evil is a powerful knowledge, for it enables us to rule the world without becoming criminals. If we had yesterday sent the lion away hungry without this knowledge, then indeed it would have been a crime. And if we had today sent the deer into the lion's jaws without this knowledge, then this too would have been a crime. But with this knowledge we have done both of these things, one seemingly opposed to the other, and have committed no crime." Now it happened that one of the gods was away during these events. And when he returned and heard what the others had done, he said, "What knowledge does this tree provide?" "Taste its fruit," they told him. "Then you'll know exactly what knowledge it is." So the god tasted it, and his eyes were opened. "Yes, I see," he said. "This is indeed the proper knowledge of the gods, the knowledge of who shall live and who shall die." When the gods saw that Adam was awakening, they said to themselves, "Now here's a creature so like us that he might almost be one of our company. What span of life and what destiny shall we fashion for him?" One of them said, "Let's give him life for the lifetime of this planet. In the days of his childhood, let's care for him as we care for all others in the garden, so that he learns the sweetness of living in our hands. But in adolescence, he'll soon realize that he's capable of much more than other creatures and will become restless in our care. Shall we then lead him to the other tree in the garden, the tree of life?" Another said, "To lead Adam like a child to this tree would deprive him of a great undertaking. As we give him the care he needs as a child, let's give him the quest he needs as an adolescent. In the quest for the tree of life, he'll discover for himself how to have life for the lifetime of this planet." The others agreed, but one said, "This might well be a long and baffling quest for Adam. Youth is impatient, and after a few thousand years of searching, he might despair of finding the tree of life. If this should happen, he might be tempted to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil instead." "Nonsense," the others replied. "You know that the fruit of this tree nourishes only us. It can no more nourish Adam than the grasses of the oxen. Surely you don't imagine that he might actually gain our knowledge by eating of this tree?" "Of course not," the other replied. "The danger is not that he would gain our knowledge, but that he might imagine he'd gained it. Having tasted the fruit of this tree, he might say to himself, 'I've eaten at the god's own tree of knowledge, and therefore know as well as they how to rule the world.'" The other god shrugged. Perhaps in childhood Adam might believe he was wise enough to rule the world, but what of it? Such arrogant foolishness would pass with maturity. "Ah," said the other, "but possessed of this arrogant foolishness, would Adam survive into maturity? In his arrogance he might look around the garden and say to himself, 'This is all wrong. Why should I share the fire of life with all these creatures? Look here, the lions and the wolves and the foxes take the game I would have for myself. This is evil. I will kill all these creatures, and this will be good. And look here, the rabbits and the grasshoppers and the sparrows take the fruits of the land that I would have for myself. This is evil. I'll kill all these creatures, and this will be good. And look here, the gods have set a limit on my growth, just as they've set a limit on the growth of all others. This is evil. I will grow without limit, taking all the fire of life that flows through this garden into myself, and that will be good. Tell me, if this should happen, how long would Adam live before he had devoured the entire world?" "If this should happen," the other said, "Adam would devour the world in a single day, and at the end of that day he would devour himself." And the gods saw that of all the trees in the garden, only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil could destroy Adam. And so they said to him, "You may eat of every tree in the garden, save the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For on the day you eat of that tree, you will certainly die."